All right, so this is one of the coolest little coffee accessories there is. And if you know what this is, the reason that I love it so much might not be what you expect. It's called the Melodrip. And we're going to come back to its origin story, which is pretty cool actually. But the way that it works is actually pretty simple. You hold it over your coffee bed, and you pour water onto it from your kettle. So instead of doing what I just did, which was a bare kettle pour, what this is going to do is it's going to take that steady stream and really make it more of like a gentle little shower, just kind of like that. And the question that you might want to ask is, well, why would I want that? Why would I want to do that? Especially if you just bought one of these very expensive kettles to make a pour over with. You may be asking, what the heck is this thing even for? And the reason that this thing exists goes back to the person who invented it, a guy named Ray Murakawa. And he has this obsession for isolating and controlling different variables when it comes to his coffee brewing. And when it comes to flavor profile, he is really obsessed with flavor clarity. Now, when it comes to isolating variables in your brew, there are some variables that we can isolate very easily. Things like temperature for your kettle, things like timing of your pours. And there are others that are actually a lot more difficult to isolate. And one of those is agitation of your brew bed. And this aims to help with that. Now, in Ray's pursuit for coffee clarity, we first have to kind of talk about what that even means in a cup of coffee. I'm not necessarily going to be talking about body here, although a lighter tea-like body is something that kind of seems to go hand in hand when people talk about clarity and flavor separation in the cup. What I'm really talking about when I'm talking about flavor clarity is your ability to pick out those different flavor notes in a cup of coffee. Now, if you're just getting into specialty coffee, a lot of people have their first kind of light bulb moment with a cup of coffee and it tastes like fruit. And very often you hear about people talking about a cup of coffee that tasted like berries when they first tried it. Blueberry was a common one for a lot of people for a lot of years. Other people say, oh, I had this cup, it tastes like strawberry or peaches. You get a good cup of pour over coffee, very often those flavor notes sort of jump out, hit you. And when that's a very high clarity cup, it's very pure. It tastes like blueberries or strawberry. And when you get a less clear cup, it can kind of turn into more of like a blueberry pie or a strawberry shortcake or a peach crisp type flavor. And that is a very crisp, very clear cup of coffee. This is a washed Ethiopian by Hatch, very floral. And those floral notes are just jumping right out of here. Delicious. Now, even though clarity has kind of really been elevated in recent years amongst pour over enthusiasts, it's not always something that you want in your cup, because depending on what is going on with your coffee bean, it could also raise things like green coffee and roast defects to the surface, which don't actually taste very good. Done right, with good coffee, clarity can be really nice, but in some cases, it doesn't flatter. And the way the Melodrip creates that clarity in the cup is very interesting. You see, ask most people about this thing, and they'll say it does that by reducing agitation in the coffee bed, which is sort of true. It does do that. But the deeper truth is kind of one layer underneath that. And it goes back to a lot of experimentation when Ray was developing this. And the line of thinking on this is really interesting, because Ray's actual goal was not just to reduce agitation in the brew. It was actually to reduce the amount of insoluble particles in your coffee brew, which are little bits and pieces of coffee that make it through the filter into your brewed coffee and don't actually dissolve. And what Ray would say is, if those insolubles are hitting your tongue, you don't taste the actual brewed coffee with as much clarity, full stop. So his goal was actually to reduce the number of insolubles that are making it into your brewed coffee. You see, when you really agitate your coffee bed, it's called, or coffee slurry, there are a lot of little tiny particles in there called fines. And when you're providing a lot of agitation, they can move around through the coffee bed a lot more efficiently, find their way in some cases through the filter and into your brewed coffee. When you agitate less, a lot of those fine particles remain sort of locked in place. They don't actually move as much, and fewer of them make it into your brew. And this is something that Ray actually measured with a centrifuge when they were developing this thing. Lower agitation results in lower insolubles in your brew, results in higher flavor clarity because your tongue isn't getting bombarded with those insoluble particles. Now, not everybody agrees with this approach, but it is very interesting. And actually, gooseneck kettles are designed to control agitation. They do provide lower agitation or more controllable agitation than like a traditional tea kettle, for example. This just takes that one step further. And what's interesting is in pour over world, there's a lot of information that gets presented as factual, this is the way it is, where in reality, it's more part of a trend. A certain method of doing things comes into vogue, it goes out of vogue, and something new is more or less accepted as fact. Good example is pre-wetting your coffee filters. I didn't do that on this brew. Originally, filters had a lot more paper residue on them, and people would get papery tastes when brewing without rinsed filters. These days, filter production has increased in quality, and that's a lot less of an issue. Also, I didn't preheat my brewer, which is something that a lot of people, even a few years ago, would have said, what are you doing? You're not even preheating your brewer. Now, cold blooms are in vogue, and people are finding that that expresses the flavor, in some cases, in a unique way. And when conversations around clarity started coming into the picture, it was very often with a push for higher extraction, or high EY, you might see people say. And that's the amount of coffee that actually is able to be dissolved into your brew. People would use very high agitation recipes, fast flowing filters, all of which would help achieve a higher extraction. Combined with a specific type of grinder, this would produce a certain type of what people would refer to as clarity. The thinking with the Melodrip is that that type of clarity might not be quite as clear as you expect because there are a lot more insolubles in your brew because of the faster flowing filter and the agitation that hit your tongue. And while it may seem clear in body with a lot of presentation of acidity, it's maybe not quite as clear as you think. And this is designed to help you get a truer sense of a clear cup of coffee without the inhibition of those insolubles in your brew. One thing about using this though is that when you reduce the amount of agitation in your brew using a tool like this, it also tends to reduce extraction because there's less mixing and churning of those coffee grounds. So it's a bit of a trade-off, and a lot of people started doing combo recipes where they would do a bloom with a kettle pour, a couple Melodrip pours, and then finish off with another bare kettle pour to kind of amp up the extraction without allowing for too much of that fines migration. Ray and the Melodrip team also released this little brewer, the Column. I have a review for this thing on my channel. It's a very charming brewer. I love using it. And it is what's called a zero bypass conical dripper, which is designed to help maintain that clarity while amping up extraction with zero bypass. That means all of the water actually needs to pass through that cake of coffee on its way into the carafe, which increases extraction. So I had used the Melodrip and I was kind of getting, okay, yeah, I can taste a clearer sense of coffee when I do this. I like how the Column allows me to amp up the extraction without losing that clarity. But when I would go back to those higher agitation recipes and I looked for that feeling on my tongue of more insolubles in the brew, you can pick it out. And it really is an interesting tool to have in your tool belt to be able to change that. And that's something I really like about the Melodrip, as well as Ray and his team, is they're not prescribing a best way to brew. They're just kind of saying, hey, here's another tool, try it out, see what you think, which is something I really appreciate. Now, beyond the kind of home brewing, lab, pour over stuff, there is another very interesting application for this, and that is travel. Now, I don't very often travel with pour over stuff because I don't want to bring along a gooseneck kettle. And the Melodrip offers a very interesting solution to that. You can pour into this using a regular tea kettle and get a very low agitation, high clarity brew. So if you're hitting the road and you want to leave your gooseneck at home, foam. This even comes apart very easily into 2 pieces. You can easily throw this in your luggage and have a solution for good low agitation pour over. It also comes with this little glass stir stick, which is really interesting. You're designed to kind of poke around in your brew bed with this thing to break up clumps. And again, that is an effort to minimize agitation and insolubles in your brew. So they include one of these things with every Melodrip. Pretty interesting. You'll also see more and more collaborations and integrations using the Melodrip. Oria's new no bypass dripper, the Z1, actually comes with a Melodrip that fits very neatly into the top. And you'll see a lot of 3D printed, they call them lifts, that go on top of the brewer and just kind of sit there and allow a Melodrip dish to just kind of sit there and be used in one spot. Now, materials and sustainability wise, these things are made in Taiwan. Taiwan's a great place to manufacture, if you didn't know that, labor laws wise. The dish is made of Eastman Triton plastic. It's a very high quality food safe plastic. You can look that up. And the handle here is made of stainless steel. It comes in a couple different finishes. I think I might actually pick up the other one. I bought this one with the column when I got the column off Kickstarter, and the other colorway in this has more of like a slate gray handle with a smoked dish. Now, at some point, I would love to see a version of the Melodrip that isn't actually plastic. Just looking at this, I can imagine that would be very complicated to make. And of course, you might want to preheat it a little bit, but that would be probably my only wish list item for the Melodrip. Besides that, a couple other considerations, overall, I think for how much this costs, it's about $30 US, and how much it can actually change your pour over brew. I almost think that this thing is just worth getting to have on your bar to mess with if you're a pour over person. One thing that I really wondered about from a performance standpoint was temperature. You're pouring it through this and, you're diffusing the water. I was kind of thinking, this could really cool down my brew. And I did some measurements with this. Wasn't as big of a difference as I thought it might be. In fact, I would even say that, with my kettle, dependent upon I was putting it down and picking it up and putting it down and picking it up off the base, almost that cycle of how it was keeping the water hot, even though it was reading the exact same temperature on the actual kettle, had more impact in how hot the water was than whether or not I was using the Melodrip. So might you want to go a degree or two hotter? Maybe, but it's a pretty minimal impact, in my experience anyways. The only other thing that I think I might want to mention if you're considering this is in the Melodrip, there are all these little cavities that all have a very small outlet for water. And around the edge, there are some cavities that are kind of half cut off by the circle that don't actually have an outlet, and water can get stuck in there, and if you don't kind of tap it out, knock it out, you can end up leaving a nice little puddle of drips on your counter. It's minor, but until you get used to using it, it is a bit of a quirk. And while people can be pretty divided on the right way to brew, the type of clarity this produces, whether other cups are as clear or whether the cups done with this are less clear, how extraction all fits into the picture, it does create a difference in the cup. For sure. And it's kind of fun to use. You grab this thing, you're doing this two-handed thing with this and your kettle. It's fun and it produces something different, but neither of those two things are actually what I like most about the Melodrip. The thing that really gets me about this, and about the column as well actually, is Ray's attitude towards coffee brewing and experimentation. He posted this story on Instagram that I actually screenshotted and I think sums up his ethos very well. And it said, I got to remember that if I make rules, I should switch to an opposing rule at least once per week. He holds everything very loosely. He's willing to be proven wrong in his own personal coffee brewing. He encourages an open atmosphere of experimentation and encourages his users to do the same. In pour over and espresso world, there's so much that is presented as like, this is the definitive truth of the best way to do this. And then that ends up getting turned up on its head a year or so later. And I just find Ray's posture in the midst of all of this really refreshing. He'll kind of say, hey, if you can think of something different, try it. Maybe you'll like it. Maybe you won't. At least you tried. I think the bottom line with this thing is, yeah, it's fun to use. It creates something different in your brew. It does allow you to control an element of your brew that is very difficult to control otherwise. agitation, which does have a big impact on the amount of insolubles in your brew. And it allows you to control it in a very granular way, even to the point of you can do it halfway through your recipe, through your whole recipe. You can try different recipes in different ways by turning that variable on or off, then taste the results and see what you think. And if you're into pour over coffee, that is just a nice little tool to have. So I think for $30, this thing lives in my pour over stable. I like it. Do I think you have to have one in order to have great pour over coffee? No, but it is really fun. But I would love to know what you think of this thing, actually. Do you agree with that definition of clarity? Or do you think, no, that doesn't sound right to me, doesn't match my experience? Whatever you think, I would like to hear from you in the comments. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.